Do you love vellum but struggle to find new ways to use it in your card making? Don't worry, because by the end of this video, I'll show you a really fun vellum technique that will not only help add an interactive element to your card, you'll also see how easy it is to incorporate bold pattern paper that you'd otherwise find difficult to use on your cards. This technique is a great stash buster as well. Let's get started. A great idea for using up your bold pattern papers is to add it behind a vellum shaker window instead of the standard acetate one. The vellum diffuses the bold design and it's such a forgiving technique. For this card, we'll make a double shaker card with 2 vellum windows. I'm using lightweight vellum from Salmon Says Stamp since heavyweight vellum is more opaque and it won't serve my purpose. I'm making a 5x7 card and using several scraps of paper from my stash. I have a piece of 110-pound hammer mill paper for ink blending and some cardstock from my stash, along with double-sided pattern papers from Cartabella's Flora No. 3 paper pad. These papers are absolutely beautiful and come with 2 sets of each design, making it tough to choose which ones to use. I'll choose a bold pattern and a more subtle one for the double shaker windows. By the way, if you're looking for the list of supplies, you'll find affiliate links in my blog post that is linked in the description. You'll find thumbnails of the detailed list of all the supplies I'm using today on my cards. It would help me out a lot if you use the links in case you decide to purchase any of these supplies. While they won't cost you anything extra, it will definitely help out my channel. So thank you very much if you decide to support me. I'm going to add some ink to the background, and I'm using Cabbage from Salmon Says Stamp and Ballet Slipper from the Pink Fresh Studio inks. I also created a few die cuts from this beautiful washi tape called Sakura by Pink Fresh Studios, and I used the coordinating die set to cut them out. I've already cut out one of the 2 shaker frames using the Blanket Stitch Brackets die set by Pink Fresh Studio. I also have some leftover heat embossed foliage pieces that I may use. I'll start by creating the background. I've chosen pink and green for the background to complement the colors of the pattern paper and the washi tape. However, I have to be careful to not mix these colors to avoid creating muddy tones. I'll start with the ballet slippers using the soft Spellbinders brushes. These are really good for covering larger areas really quickly. I'll create little patches of pink and green here and there. I'm using a really light hand to avoid creating blotches, but I'm not too worried since a lot of it will be covered by the shaker windows. Also, the inks will smooth out quite a bit as they dry. I didn't control the pressure here, as you can see, and I got a dark patch. So I'll use my glass magnetic mat to tap off the ink before bringing the brush to the paper. I want to keep the background really light, but you'll see me add a little more color later since the inks lightened up quite a bit after drying. I'll be cutting borders for the smaller shaker now, and you'll find me using both the etching and the cutting dies from the Blanket Stitch Bracket set. This ensures I can create a border instead of a solid shape with etchings on it. I'll first use the dark green cardstock to cut out the border. I'm aligning the dies really carefully to maintain a symmetrical border. I'm sticking the dies down with washi tape so they don't shift, and also because I need to keep them together so I can cut more layers for stacking, and I need them to all be exactly the same size. I need some layering pieces for both the larger and the smaller borders to add some reinforcement since the thin strips of paper may be challenging to support with just foam tape. I'm securing the dies together again with washi tape to ensure all the borders are of uniform width. By keeping the dies secured, I can avoid ending up with uneven sizes and a headache when I'm trying to stack them. In addition to the layers for the border, I also cut out a solid green piece for the smaller shaker and the pretty floral piece for the larger one. I use the etch dies only for these pieces since the cutting die is only required if you want to cut out a border. I cut out the vellum as well with just the etch die. Since I don't like to waste anything, honestly, and these are such cute prints, I went ahead and cut out 2 similar triangles from the leftover scraps. Although they didn't create perfect triangles, I can still use them to decorate the envelope for this card. Finally, I have all the necessary pieces for the shaker components. So in the next steps, I'll walk you through assembling the shaker windows. I will first start with adhering the background panel on the card base. So let's just get started. I'm making sure to see the panel is even on all sides, and I'll use foam tape to give it some dimension. I'll adhere the foam tape very close to the edge, making sure nothing overhangs the edge. As always, I only peel the backing paper partially so I can take my time to position the panel correctly over the card and not have it become skewed. I'll go ahead and adhere the bases of the 2 shaker windows. It's time to create the vellum window, which will be sandwiched between the top layer, which is the colored border, and the rest of the white ones. I'm applying glue to the vellum with a strip of paper so there isn't too much glue and the application is uniform, because this will prevent the glue from oozing out onto the vellum. Now things started going a little wrong from here, but again, as always, I'll show you how I fix things. I never edit out the mistakes from my videos because I'm sure you appreciate seeing the real things as they pan out. After gluing down the vellum, I suddenly realized I should have heat embossed the sentiment first. Thank God I remembered in good time. There's a slight overhang here, so I'll use my trimmer to remove it. Next, I'll use my MISTI to stamp the sentiment and heat emboss it. I'll use my sticky mat to ensure the shaker window doesn't move since I may need to stamp it multiple times. I'll apply anti-static powder as always and then the embossing ink. I'm using a happy birthday sentiment from the Arch Sentiment stamp set from the Greetery. I'll center it but keep it away from the right edge since I'll need to close the frame to hold in the shaker bits later on. To lift anything off my sticky mat, I usually like to curl the mat back onto itself and then lift the paper or vellum off instead of just yanking it off the sticky mat, since that could curl the paper. I'm using gold embossing powder from Wow, and I'll tap off any excess. I'll also use a brush to flick off any unwanted particles sticking to the vellum. I'll funnel the embossing powder back into the container and then heat set the sentiment. I'll set that off to the side now and add some magnets to hold it down so it flattens out again. Next, I'll glue the frame die cuts together and stack them up and have both the shaker frames ready. Next, I'll adhere the green frame to the stacked white frames. I've done the same with the pink one. I'll now cut out 1/4-inch strips of green and pink to create the right edges of the shaker windows and a few additional white strips for layering. I'll use some gold and some multicolored sequins and confetti inside the shaker. I'll use a really thin foam strip from AliExpress to raise up the windows even further. Removing the backing paper will allow me to twist it into shape. What I need to do now is apply a little bit of anti-static powder around the inside edge of the frame so that sequins don't stick to the foam. I'll do it on the outside as well. I'll brush the excess powder off and apply glue on the foam tape since the anti-static powder got on it, and also dirt and oil from my fingers, which removed the adhesive. I'll do the same thing with the green window. This mix is from Simon Says Stamp, and the other two that I used were from AliExpress. You can see that the ink has really lightened up a bit too much, so I'll add a little more ink. You have a double shaker here, and it's a very clean and simple card. It looked tedious since I cut out so many layers of the borders, but you can just use foam and not have to deal with all the fiddly stuff. And you can, of course, use any shape for the shaker windows. You can have 2 circles, you can have a mix of different shapes, or anything else you fancy. I'd love to know about your experience with vellum. Do you like using it in your card making? Do let me know in the comments, because I hear a lot of people say they love vellum but shy away from actually using it. I added the floral washi tape, die cuts, and that makes this card complete. If you're interested in seeing 5 more ways to use vellum and several tips on gluing vellum without making it ugly, you should check out this video here.